Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. So, this is our last episode before the summer holidays, and I'm really pleased to cover this topic. I did feel that I should have covered it months ago, but this lady was recommended to me and it's taken us a while to set it up. So thank you to my good friend Sarah Reed, who also works for Kantar, who did some of the research, and also my other friend Gillian Forrest, just in case you are listening. This is how I come to be talking to Lesley Salem all about the menopause revolution. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And I'm delighted to have this guest with me this week, who's actually come to me through a couple of friends of mine and contacts, but on a hugely important topic that I've been meaning to cover for literally months. So I'm delighted to have Lesley Salem with me today. She is founder of Over the Bloody Moon, who you may have heard of. And the role is that they partner with companies to make sure that they're menopause friendly. Lesley is a certified health coach. She specialises in menopause. She's got a menopause podcast, The Change Makers, so you can follow up on this. But the most important here, you may well see her in the press, etc., is that she's really well connected in all things menopause, which is for a large proportion of our audience listening in terms of us supporting people that we work with, and really educating businesses in terms of how we can manage this this situation for 50% of the workforce, at least, more effectively. You work with huge numbers of organisations in both private and public sector, don't you, Lesley? And I thought this is just a great topic for us to go into the summer holidays with to learn more about. So thank you for joining us today.
Oh, I'm really delighted to be on the show. Thank you so much.
So Lesley, can you just give me a little bit of background? Because I'm curious as to how you got into this sort of specialism.
Yeah, so actually my 25 plus career was in a completely different world of branding and innovation. And I moved into this as a result of my own very difficult, challenging, ignorant entry into perimenopause, which coincided with starting a new job, a small organisation with a primarily a male board. And to be honest, I didn't really know what was going on with me. So it wasn't even like I could have that conversation like, I'm having hormone imbalance. What can we do about it? I had no idea. I just thought I was going mad. So unfortunately, I was the statistic, the 10% that leave the workforce because of menopause. But I see it as a gift, and it's taken me into a whole different world. So as a result, though, of that, I was 46 when I discovered the term perimenopause. I was really incensed that somebody that was really into health, actually, and obviously my background's research, I just thought it was unbelievable that I hadn't heard of this. And that inspired me to set up Over the Bloody Moon and particularly focus on the workplace. Our whole raison d'etre is to keep women in the workplace for longer, to help them thrive through the transition. And we know that with education, talking about it, normalizing it, and support at work and out of work, and early intervention and efficient management, all of those things we know contribute to people absolutely embracing menopause. So it shouldn't be something that's feared. So so Over the Bloody Moon is on a mission to remove the muddle from menopause.
Remove the muddle from menopause. I love it. I think Over the Bloody Moon is an inspired name. It's absolutely brilliant in terms of this. And it's just weird though, isn't it? I mean, I'm similar age in terms of all my friends talking about it, but it's almost like it was this was something which was some sort of dark secret. It's almost our parents appear to have to deal with menopause without talking about it. It's just something that didn't figure. And then it's coming up much more to the fore now, obviously rightly.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons behind that. If you look at sort of like societal trends, which is also my background, I'm really interested in kind of like the sociological patterns. And I think we're at a very unique stage of life, and there've been various factors that are now creating this menopause revolution, as Carolyn Harris, co-chair of the Menopause Task Force, calls it. Firstly, if we think to our mother's generation, many of them weren't working.
Yeah.
And many of them didn't have children at home. So the biological timing of menopause, it's meant to be a time of reflection and connection and space, and reevaluating what the second spring is. It was all perfectly aligned. Now, for those people that have children, they might have started a family much later. They might have young children when they're going through perimenopause, the stage before menopause. We also know that stress is a trigger for the onset of early menopause, and hey ho, pandemic and all of, and life is quite stressful. So actually the trajectory trend of people starting to notice fluctuations and get symptoms is a lot earlier. And we have the sandwich sort of, with the sandwich generation, the linchpin generation of having to deal with elderly parents who are living longer, but not necessarily, in full health. So there's a lot more strain on women, combined with the majority of women that will be going through menopause in midlife. So obviously it happens a lot, can happen at any age. But for the midlifers, they are Gen X. And Gen X are a powerful, generation who've always been breaking boundaries, breaking rules, and moving life and work to suit their needs. They were the first generation to really, in the workplace, demand flexible working. So I think there's a combination of that, plus media, politicians, lay people, everybody kind of coming together in that sort of, the voice becomes louder and more visible.
Yeah, I can see that. That does actually make sense in terms of that, and identify with much of what you're saying there. And I suppose talking about yourself in terms of your story and just the brand to what Over the Bloody Moon does, before perhaps we go into a bit about, I know you've done some research recently, you're working with government, there's loads there that I'd really like to explore with you. So how did you stepped out of the workplace because you were the 10%, but turned it into something hugely positive? So what is it that you do in terms of this?
So now, 3 years on, we are a collective of menopause specialists, so clinicians, nutritionists, neuroscientists, all sorts of specialists, alongside HR coaches and policy experts and consultants, and creative content creators. I brought everybody together that is passionate around menopause, and we have a variety of different services for companies, both public and private sector. So we support on policy and strategy creation and guidance. We have a whole array of different events and activities and communication to support on awareness and education, including things like expos. We have our training. So we have CPD accredited training, Menopause Mentors, which is an e-learning course, but there's also live. And then we have a whole load of different support resources, digital resources, printed resources to help people managers, colleagues, and those people that are directly impacted by menopause. And we have special coaches as well, who are a mix of exec, NLP, and also menopause, specialism. So those are some of the services. I'm also going to show. I don't know whether the listeners, it's an auditory experience, but I'm holding up for Lucinda a vest.
Screenshot while we're talking.
Meno vest, and you can find out more on the website www.overthebloodymmoon.com/Meno vest. So this was something that I created. I commissioned and organised a company, a textile studio called Thread Design, to come up with something that men could wear to experience a hot flush, to raise awareness, empathy, cultivate conversation, build allyship in the workplace around menopause. And there's been a bit of discussion around that as to, do men need to experience pain to empathize? And actually, I think, that shouldn't be seen as a criticism. I think when you have a body that doesn't change, it's very hard to understand and see the change that might be of somebody, close to you. And so this is a really good way in just, anywhere from 3 minutes to an hour of wearing the vest for people to experience what it might be like. And very quickly, I mean, I shared this, and it was tried on at the weekend by Sean Fletcher, who's a presenter on Sunday Morning Live. And within 3 minutes, he was saying, I've got palpitations. I feel tight chested. I'm about to go onto the set and present, and I'm feeling hot and flustered. And when he was on set wearing it, he got his words muddled up. So, it's quite profound, even in just a few minutes. And then we think about this goes on for years for people.
So I didn't realise when you told me about the vest off, I don't know whether I thought it was something for women to wear to help with the hot flushes. So it's for men to understand.
It's a training tool. Yeah, it's a training tool.
Okay, I love it. Maybe bring out a childbirth equivalent, maybe not, but it's all sorts of things to help us understand the sexes. And I dare say maybe there's things that it's not just a one way that we don't understand in terms of men, challenges that they go through. But that's fabulous. And do you want to tell me a little bit more? You were saying, did you say you were showing this in government? There's some stuff we were going to talk about, the policies and things here in terms of.
Oh well, I was just saying that the Meno vest was launched in Westminster. At the end. What was that? Sorry, I can't remember the date. June the 28th.
It was at time of recording.
I'll say that again. So Meno vest was launched on the 28th of June in Westminster. So MPs got to try it on first. And the reason for that is that they've obviously got huge influence in terms of the government. Last September, the government set up the Menopause Task Force, of which Caroline Harris is is a co-chair there, and she sponsored the event. And so there's a lot of activity as a result of the menopause workplace that's going on at the moment, looking at education in schools, looking at NHS and having a massive rehaul in terms of better training, better prescription, better early intervention, but also in the workplace. And one of the things that they've looked at and was back in July, organisations such as myself were invited to submit a paper to say whether we felt that current legislation in the workplace was going far enough. So, for example, it's best practice to have a menopause policy, but it's not mandatory. Only 25% of companies have a menopause policy. So, one of the aspects that organisations like me felt was that for companies of a certain size, there should be a menopause policy. And the other thing that came out of that report was that there should be an introduction of menopause as a 10th protective characteristic in the Equality Act, which is in 2010. So currently, if it gets to, and hopefully, good HR will stop it getting to this extreme, but we are seeing a 44% rise in tribunal cases, with people taking their companies to court around discrimination because of menopause year on year. This year versus last year. And the way that people will often go to court is through the Equality Act. And there's 3 protective characteristics, which is sex, gender, and disability. You can only choose one of them. So there was a whole submission that went in a few months ago to the government via the task force to say people should be able to choose more than one aspect of discrimination, and also menopause should be introduced into the Equality Act. Sadly, a response came back just under a fortnight ago, or the beginning of June, just to say there weren't plans to look at the Equality Act or to change it at this current time. And also they were sticking to the single discrimination. So I think there is still growing pressure and advocacy around that. So I suspect we will see that, change in the next year or so.
So would it not fit into, though, one of those, the gender one, for example? Would it not automatically?
Well, it can do, but it's not always. It can be more complex than that. And quite frankly, there's pregnancy in there.
Right.
So why wouldn't you have menopause? Menopause, and then you've got transition. You've got gender transition. Well, this is a transition that goes on for sometimes over a decade. And in the context of more women working longer into their careers, and the UK having one of the highest female representation in the workplace, 75% of people, women, are of menopausal age. Of menopausal age, 75% are working. And there's 6.6 million women aged 40 to 54, according to the ONS stats last year. So that's a hefty amount of our workforce that we have to look after.
It's interesting, actually, because I think there's an overlap there as well between that population and the people who, since lockdown or since just over recent years, are looking at changing their role. They want better work-life balance. They are the ones, maybe for all of the reasons that you've talked about before, and also maybe menopause plays into it, who are the ones that are looking to leave the workplace as it stands, unless they have more flexibility. And the reality is there's a huge amount of experience and skills sitting in that population that businesses don't want to lose.
Yeah, there is that. I think fundamentally the construct in which women operate in many companies is still very patriarchal. And I think it gets to a point where women's for some women that are in their mid-40s, where they've simply just had enough. Yeah. Like if they don't, it doesn't feel authentic to have a leadership style that is very masculine if you're a certain kind of woman. And so I think there's actually a wider issue in terms of feminine leadership power and fundamentally changing kind of the cultural constructs. As well, as much as we can support women with menopause, I think the underlying issue is a bit deeper.
Part of a bigger story, which of course then plays into diversity and all those sorts of things. Never going to fix that if you're losing the key people who can be the leaders of and changings of the future. But we'll keep this focus because that goes into other bigger topics. There's lots and lots of overlap. So you threw some very interesting statistics in there, I felt, Lesley, in terms of that. You're talking about 75%. Oh, hang on. I know you did some research. Rather than me try and quote them back, you did some research recently, didn't you, with Cantor?
We did.
Got some great evidence.
So we did a very comprehensive study with Cantor, and we looked at over 1,000 women in the UK who were aged 30 to 65, who were experiencing menopause at some, they were at some stage in their menopause journey, or post-menopausal. We wanted to get that inclusion and diversity aspect, and we specifically made sure in our sample we had people with pre-existing medical conditions, physical and mental, and wanted to kind of understand the history as well of what makes someone thrive versus barely survive. And we found actually that there were some determining factors around that. So, for HR, for people that if you have got women of a certain age who've also had a history in your workplace or outside of the workplace with poor mental health, they are more likely at risk to need greater support and earlier intervention. People that have experienced racism or trauma or abuse or acute stress, currently or historically, much more likely to have a difficult time. People from cultures where they have to mask, or if they are in a male-dominated division or organization where they're masking, makes menopause much more challenging. It exacerbates the symptoms. So there are kind of, various factors that will put people at risk. What we found was really quite disappointing given the amount of advocacy and work that has been going on in the past couple of years. So in our study, 59% of women still feel that they have no or very little support around menopause, and 65% felt unsupported at work. Only 21% were mentioning menopause to colleagues, 3% to managers, which dropped to 1% for C2DEs. So there was a difference in socioeconomic kind of class as well in terms of masking.
So I'm assuming, do you want to explain that? I'm assuming so it's more the different.
Oh, yeah. So socioeconomic groupings basically take a household income. So the more affluent people were disclosing symptoms versus those that were in lower income households were keeping it more quiet. And that might be because of anxiety around losing job, or that they have a tough it out culture. So what we found was that talking about menopause, the more that women talk about it, the more advocacy they have, and the more different networks that they have, the more likely they were to describe their menopause as not at all or very light, which was amazing. So, and we also know that of the people that did talk to their managers, 62% found it really helpful. So there's definitely kind of, this talk it out is a really key first sort of point around normalizing and getting it out in the open. And if anybody in the audience is thinking, well, that's okay, for organizations that are more female heavy, but for mine, it's just, mainly men, that's really difficult. They've got partners, they may have their mum, they may, it may explain their behavior of their mum, or they may have a friend, so I think there's, and of course they've got, there will be some colleagues. So, normalizing it is really key. And the other thing is that 30 to 50% of men will experience low testosterone, which causes many similar shared symptoms to menopause. So engaging men that way as well can be really helpful. The hormone health affects all of us.
Does that happen at the same age range for men?
Yeah, so in midlife, from 45 to plus is when andropause it starts to happen. Yeah. Whereas with women in menopause, it can happen any time from puberty. Okay. So premature menopause is under the age of 40, and early is under the age of between 40 and 45. So 1 in 100 people will have early menopause. So if somebody's also had surgery, a hysterectomy, or cancer treatment, they will be a medically induced menopause or surgical menopause. And so we shouldn't make assumptions that it's just a midlife thing. It can happen at any age.
So lots of really, really interesting figures there. And actually, I'm going to say in terms of links, we'll put links in the show notes. I'm sure there's links so we can go and find this information that you've just shared there. In terms of
on the website there, if you go on to menopause research, you can download the infographic with all the stats.
Fantastic. So let's get practical here then. So in terms of we've got people professionals audience out here. I mean, I heard you mention menopause policies, but I mean, policies are a statement that it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily need to have a policy to be really supportive of people with menopause, and vice versa. You might be unsupportive and have a policy. So what practical steps have you seen that have been really effective in organizations that are really doing a great job supporting women in this time? What have you seen?
Well, it's a dual approach of top-down senior or ELT support versus grassroots ERGs. And when you have that combination, it's really powerful. There's no right or wrong. Just having a group in there of influence is really key. So employee resource groups, networks are fantastic. And, I was chatting to Carrie-Anne Lackey from Co-op, who was the lead there on their menopause network. And she literally was like a woman of one who has managed to get and galvanize a whole movement now within Co-op. So, it's always, what you do is you find kind of buddies, and what it does is it helps people that are impacted, not just women, it can also be men impacted in their own way, to come along and share experiences in a safe and protected environment. And then that becomes normal. Like, you realize it's not just me. It's not just worse for me. There's always someone else that's got it worse. And it gives people the confidence to then go out in the organization and start to build allies. What's also really important is that we start to hear more stories and more vulnerability from our senior female leaders that are going through it. It can be really difficult because we know the glass ceiling doesn't sort of mean that they have many women around them at that level. But one of our clients is Procter & Gamble. And there's been various examples of senior leaders there who have gone, sort of shared to their CEO about their own experience. And as a result of that, Procter & Gamble made a film. I was invited actually to be on a panel of that with a variety of different speakers in their organization sharing their stories. And that went out as a podcast and a video to the whole global, the whole of the UK and Ireland. So sharing stories, sharing vox pops, getting men as well to share what it's like living with somebody, or maybe how they supported a colleague, sends out a signal, it's okay for you to talk. So that's kind of like awareness. But then we have kind of like the whole systemic piece. And as you say, policy is just a piece of paper. But what is important is that an organization starts off with knowing what their KPIs are, what their baseline is, what they want to measure. Do they know the story? Have they looked into the data to identify how many people are actually leaving because of menopause? How many absenteeism or what's the issue of presenteeism because of menopause? They need to identify what the pain points are. They need to do a survey or an employee, satisfaction to see how many people it affects indirectly or directly, what people's needs are. And once you've got your baseline, and you ask people what you want, what do we need? What's our first step? Then the roadmap can be built and evaluated, and you can start to kind of measure real impact, with the intervention. So that is really key, making sure that you look at, what have you got that's familiar already around flexible working, capturing reasons why people have exited. Have you got a menopause, as a drop down that people can choose, etc. So that's kind of like the systemic piece. And then, of course, we have the cultural piece, which is really, really pivotal. That is around training. So one of the most effective services that we provide is our CPD accredited menopause mentors training program. It could be done either e-training at individuals' own pace. It's like mental health first aider program for menopause, or we can do live sessions for different people, like people managers, ELTs, etc. But what the training does, and it's not just us that does training, but training is really powerful. And what it does is it creates empathy and systems and processes and protocol. So there is kind of consistency across the business in terms of how to respond appropriately and empathetically. And within that sits really important actions like individualized reasonable adjustments. So that means sitting down with an individual and thinking about their working conditions, their working hours, their job role at the moment, and the type of tasks that they have to do, conducting an environmental audit. I prefer to use that word rather than risk assessment, because that stigmatizes a person that's going, through menopause. So that needs to be done on an individual basis. And so just going back to that point about policy, in the policy, we all tend to kind of say, have a desktop fan, access to cold water, etc. Those are just like basics, but not, actually a lot of people that have hot flushes will also have chills. So they don't want to be plonked under an aircon vent. That's the last thing that they need. So it's about recognizing and talking to the individual about what is important. So I think it's a combination of all of those things, and then just finally is that cultivating that conversation, which just is like a constant thread that just is not ongoing, shouldn't die out. So I don't like to put that at the front. A lot of companies just kind of the first point is like, let's do an awareness workshop, but it has to be a continual conversation. And also, we help companies, but our job is to enable and empower companies, give them the tools so they then go and own that, and then sort of can take it on as things evolve over time.
Would you say, a lot of those things that you've mentioned there, they fit really closely, I think, it's basically being inclusive of everybody, wherever they are in their lives, whether you've got someone who's transgender or anything that's a transition, or a situation at home where someone has got other pressures. It's being really genuinely tuned into the emotional requirements and situation of our people and valuing them, isn't it?
Yeah. It's an interesting one, because when I approach companies, they everyone's like, who's the right person to kind of talk about menopause, and often it is the I&D lead. But it's not just I&D, it's well-being. It fits within, it's very, very close to mental health. 67% of people feel that the most significant impact on menopause is to do with negative feelings and mood. 59% feel impacted in terms of a loss of confidence. So it's not just a physical thing. So it's also, like, what are we doing in the workplace around mental health that can also be aligned with the well-being strategy. And then also learning and development with training and leadership as well, which I suppose does fit into kind of the inclusion, piece, but recognizing the importance of helping people, continue to feel confident enough to progress.
Yeah, it's a bit about being genuinely, you talked about it being whether it's a wellbeing strategy or an inclusion strategy. It's about being genuinely inclusive, genuinely being bothered about people's wellbeing, I guess, wherever it sits in your organization. And if you're an HR department of one, then I guess maybe it sits with you, but maybe it's a bigger leadership conversation overall. But it's what you don't want is for it to be an initiative, do you? It's something that's as you said earlier, about making sure that it's something that's an ongoing awareness and conversation, as opposed to just a sort of quick fix and a tick in the box.
Yeah, although there's just in terms of kind of on the radar, because this is we're now coming into the end of the summer, but September the 26th is in Inclusion and Diversity Week, and then also October is Menopause Awareness Month. So these, if you haven't done anything, wait for people to come back from the summer and it's a great time to launch and then sort of be, continuing the activities. So having an action plan and a roadmap that sort of, a 1 to 5 year plan is a really good idea as well.
And gives you a nice bit of noise as well around something that gives that pinnacle of awareness of which you can build on. So actually those are really useful dates, because this is going out just before the summer holidays, and perhaps if you're listening to this, then there's some key tips here about awareness. There's the data that will point you to Lesley's website, and the data and the infographic that we've referred to, and some ideas here, whether you want to look at training, whether you want to look at mentors. Consider evaluating, doing a survey of your people, see how well supported they feel. There's lots of ideas that you've just gone through there, which are really practical ones, that if any of our listeners want to really look into this as something to focus on in time for Menopause Awareness Month in October, then that's a great thing. So you've already mentioned your website, Lesley. In terms of if people want to reach out to you directly, what's the best way for them to get hold of you?
Yeah, so if you send an email to hello@overthebloodymoon.com, then it'll be picked up that way. And if people go to the website, they'll see that there is a corporate page and also Menovest, which we're hiring out for the expos and different events.
Fabulous. I look forward to seeing some pictures, maybe tag us in people wearing that and getting that awareness out there. Thank you so much, Lesley, for joining us today on the HR Uprising podcast.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me.
So I really hope that gave you some inspiration, and potentially you can set up your own Menopause Awareness Month in October. It's given you some inspiration, and there's loads. If you go to the website hruprising.com, there's loads and loads of links and useful information that you can get from Lesley's organisation, overthebloodymoon.com. That is our final episode until the autumn. I'd love to hear from you. If there's topics that you want me to cover, give me some inspiration. You can message me on LinkedIn. You can go on our LinkedIn group. It's great for me to have some ideas as to what topics I should be investigating and researching and doing more of next year. And of course, it would be really appreciated if you haven't had the chance, and if you enjoy what we do, if you could rate or review. It really helps other people to find us. And then finally, if you are looking for management development, we will be doing management development courses in September. So go to actus.co.uk. We're doing that. We'll also be doing more of our influence and impact training, and potentially doing the Change Superhero. It depends on numbers. So we're running waiting lists and interest for any of those. You can go to Actus and register interest there if you think you might want to do anything like that in September, October, and would like to join in with us. And in the meantime, I just wish you have a lovely summer, a relaxing summer, as well as get the jobs done in between the kids being off school or whatever it might be that affects you. So thank you as ever for tuning into the HR Uprising podcast. I really appreciate you listening. I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.